back and forth on what it is to really talk about counters and repair requests and all of that stuff. So it's more of a technical training, but there'll be some strategy, I'm sure, somewhere along the way. And Niki, take it away.
Okay, so I'm sure all of you know that when you get a purchase contract and you are the listing agent, you are going to counter that purchase contract. I'm going to tell you one of the things that is missing most of the time, not most of the time, that's a fib. I would say about 40% of the time, I get purchase contracts without, I'm opening the purchase contract right now.
I know where you're going with this. I love it. I love it.
Sorry, let's move that up.
This is the offer you have coming in, you're saying?
Mm-hmm. So this is the offer I received on my listing.
Uh-huh.
And I go through all the terms and I'm writing my counteroffer and I send just the counteroffer out for signature. First of all, you're not ever supposed to counter an offer without the buyer being able to see whether the seller is agreeing or not agreeing to liquidated damages and arbitration. So every time you send seller counteroffer 1 or seller multiple counteroffer 1, you either need to include the whole contract or you need to include this one page to show whether or not your seller is agreeing to this. And it absolutely says that on the seller counteroffer. The second thing is, and I can't believe how often this happens, this checkbox right here, if checked, seller's acceptance is subject to the attached counteroffer. I get this all the time, not checked. People go to open escrow and this box isn't checked and the date isn't there. That counteroffer is not part of the contract. If your seller signs here but doesn't check this, they're saying they agree to all the terms in the contract. Most people will give it to you and tell you to, they'll send it back to you and be like, can you please check that box? But you never know when you're going to meet somebody that's going to say, your seller accepted this offer, period, the end.
And I've actually worked with agents where they were literally trying to create a lawsuit right off the get-go just based off of this. So I would say for those of you that are watching this, you want to make sure right where she's circling, this is everything. Like, I just want you to know. And again, it's just like the sequence of events. And I think Niki said it the best. She said, you're basically saying that, okay, we're agreeing to a counteroffer before we've even known if the seller's going to sign off on everything else that we've written up, right? What if they draw like red lines through the contract, or they edit something and then they sign it, or they do something weird? I've seen attorneys actually strike out information in a contract before. So again, just make sure that everything is happening in its sequential order like it's supposed to.
What form is this we're looking at right now? I'm confused. Which form?
It's the purchase contract.
This is the purchase contract.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
It's the very last page.
So this is the initial start to us talking about counters today, because
this is the initial. So this is the initial contract that the buyer sends.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And if your seller is accepting, then they're just going to sign down here. But if you're countering, absolutely that needs to be filled in.
And that needs to be sent back to the buyer.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, the whole contract or the counteroffer on page 8. It's much easier just to send the whole contract.
Send back the whole contract with the counter.
Yes.
Yep, signed. Yep.
Yeah, that totally didn't happen in the last thing I did. That's why it was just interesting to watch. It was a buyer who countered, and they didn't even send a buyer's counter. They did their counter on the seller's counter. I mean, is that even acceptable? That's what he did. That's what he did. He crossed out the number, put in his on the seller's counter, he didn't even have, it was so weird.
Yeah, but you were dealing with a West Side agent, I think, and that's a little more Wild West. I'm not gonna lie. A little more like they make their own rules. Let's move on to an actual counteroffer, like a SCO or an SMCO.
Okay, hold on one sec. Seller counteroffer. Okay. You need to put in the date that it's written. This is the day that you actually write your counteroffer. You need to click that it's a counteroffer to the purchase agreement. And this right here is the date of the purchase agreement. Okay. Buyer and seller names are supposed to be filled in. And then you put the terms in here. I see these all the time. Lots of people write them lots of different ways. I personally prefer the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 method because I think when it's a paragraph, it's harder to separate the details out. The big thing I want to say about this is, and if you've taken a class from me before, you know, 9. So say I have 15 things I'm countering on, I can put 9 right here. If I just put enter, I can put 10, 11, 12, and I can keep going and going and going, right? So what happens when I do that, I'm going to just show you, is you're not going to see them there, but when you email it out for signatures or when you print it out, hold on.
Are you doing a text overflow?
Yes,
okay.
It takes it all and puts it on this text overflow addendum. Okay, and the reason why I always want you to use a text overflow when you're countering on terms is because at the bottom of this form, all it says is that the foregoing terms and conditions are incorporated in and made part of the counteroffer referred to in the document to which this is the text overflow addendum. And the person acknowledges receipt. When they sign this, buyer and seller, they're just acknowledging that they've seen all of these details, okay? A lot of people want to just write see addendum. Okay, that is not what we want you to do, and I'll show you why right now. This is a normal addendum. At the bottom it says, the foregoing terms and conditions are hereby agreed to. If you use a seller counteroffer and an addendum, you're going to have somebody, if they don't agree to the terms, that doesn't want to sign your addendum. Because when they sign, they're agreeing to all those terms.
And Niki, that automatically populates, or do you have to go into forms and like the second part of it, the overflow?
The text overflow, as long as you just keep hitting enter,
until it won't do it anymore.
Automatically populate everything that you type onto the text overflow addendum. Okay, and that one, you don't agree to anything. You're just agreeing that you read it. This one, if you sign it, you're agreeing to it. So what happens is seller does seller counteroffer 1 with a regular addendum. Buyer doesn't like those terms. Buyer doesn't sign it. Buyer does a counteroffer with their own addendum. Seller doesn't like those terms. The seller won't sign it. Then you have all these addendums that aren't fully executed, which we don't want that. So I'm going to say this, you're probably going to want to just shoot me by the end of this class, but always use that text overflow addendum.
What's it? Is that what it's called? It's a text overflow addendum that automatically happens
It
when you write.
automatically happens. You cannot find it in the forms over here, which is, I'd like to call Laura about that every day until they change it. But
So wait, I'm sorry.
as long as you push enter when you get to the end of the 9 spaces, it's just going to keep giving you more and more room. Does that make sense?
Did you want us to say something about the addendum on there? I know you said not to do like some people, and I've seen where they write see addendum up at the top and that's it. Do you want us to write somewhere on that front part see addendum, or just number it and it'll just do its own thing?
Let me show you again. Let's see.
Yeah, pull up the PDF. I think the way you're
Not that
sharing,
one.
I think the way you're sharing your screen though, I think you're only sharing the web page, and it's not going to allow you to show us that.
Do you see the addendum now or no?
No, because
Okay.
when you hit share screen, you only share this web page, not like your desktop.
Oh, can I share my desktop?
Oh, there you go. Now we can see it.
Okay, so this is what, okay, that's better. Seller counteroffer 1. It says see text overflow addendum. And then when you scroll to the next page, there it is. And there would be all the terms right here.
So it does it for you guys, just so you
It
know.
does it for you, and it just says undersigned, acknowledge receipt, a copy of this text overflow addendum.
But did you just say not to do that, or did I hear it backwards? Did you just say not to write see text overflow addendum on the first one? Like,
Yeah, you don't have to because the system writes it for you.
okay, so you want us to start numbering though right there at other terms, just boom,
Yep.
boom, 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 boom. Okay.
Yep. So like 1, purchase price to be $549. 2, earnest deposit 3%, blah, 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 and so forth and so on.
Can you discuss some of the things that would go in there? I mean, you just said purchase price or EMD. Is that where you're also suggesting the escrow and title and all that?
Mm-hmm. And if you were going to say buyer's investigation to be 10 days, appraisal contingency removal to be 14 days, loan contingency removal to be 21 days, buyer to provide proof of funds showing full amount of down payment, tenants to remain in the property. You know, sometimes there's lots of things that you end up countering on. All coast escrow, Mark Manwaring, there is no city transfer tax in the city of Long Beach. Go ahead.
What about the arbitration? What if you just put in there, hey, arbitration clause to be in effect? Instead
You
of
could-
going back, I'm sorry.
Instead of sending the whole purchase contract?
Yeah.
You could do that. You could write seller and buyer both agree to arbitration and liquidated damages.
Bingo.
21.
And just as a nitpicky thing from me too, I would rather you guys also quote those item numbers. So they're item numbers 21 and 22. So it's fine to say liquidated damages and arbitration, but there's a lot more language than just that in those 2 clauses. So I'd like you guys to also include, you know, item numbers 21 and 22, you know, liquidated damages and, you know, arbitration to be in effect. It just as a best practice.
I don't see where I can check desktop.
If you go back to where you were, it was working.
Yeah, it's because I have to go back in and switch my screens.
Okay.
Okay, so any questions here?
No.
No.
I have a question. This is Harold.
Hi, Harold.
Hi. So if somebody on their offer writes that title is to be ABC or seller's choice, do you have to counter that? Is it better to make it clear that you're going to choose who you want?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, because most of the time, myself as a TC, if it's not countered out, we're just going to go with what the buyer wrote.
Oh, okay.
Because it's the only one that's named.
Okay, okay.
Okay. So unless otherwise specified in number 2 right here, this counteroffer expires on the 3rd day at 5 p.m. Always remember, if you're going to change it, say you just want to give them 24 hours, make sure you put in a time. Because in the purchase contract, the end time is 11:59 p.m. So you want to put like 5 p.m. or 4 p.m. or 6 p.m. on July 10th. If you send out a counteroffer and Lord knows what happens, but everything goes crazy and you don't want to counter it anymore, you can withdraw the counteroffer by sending a woo. And it says so right there on 2B. Okay, seller needs to sign this before you send it over. If buyer signs here and doesn't check the box again, they are accepting the terms in the counteroffer and the purchase agreement. I still see things that are not checked subject to the attached counteroffer. Okay, confirmation of acceptance. This is not necessary to open escrow, right? But you want to confirm that you are aware that escrow is opening, that you now have a contract, the date and the times begin. And it's either the agent or the clients that initial here.
And keep in mind, guys, too, I've talked to several different attorneys over time, and I know how it says a binding agreement is created when a copy of signed acceptance is personally received. I will tell you right now, I have talked to at least 4 out of 5 of the major attorneys in California for real estate, and they all say it does not have anything, sorry, to do with confirmation of acceptance.
Right.
So once you have the volley between buyer and seller's signatures on this form, like especially the number 5, the acceptance, and like it stops, let's say, on this form, or maybe it goes to another counteroffer, these terms are agreed to. And I think something else important, Nikki, to point out is the fact that this is a seller counteroffer. So this is not a seller multiple counteroffer, which
right.
we should point out the difference there as well.
Yes, I'm going to go back to that because there's a couple points I want to match. So this is the seller counteroffer and the text overflow addendum. I'm going to switch my screen back. Okay, so we're going to go back to the seller multiple counteroffer. Okay, so once again, this is number 1. It's dated today. I received the purchase contract yesterday. That's the buyer. Again, 1. And all I'm doing is hitting enter. That's how you get the more lines. If I was to type, sorry, it will enter for me, but I kind of just think it's easier to just push enter. So this is going to give me a text overflow addendum again. When the seller signs this, they sign on number 5. they do not sign number 8 until after the buyer signs number 7. So we send this seller multiple counteroffer to John Smithson. He agrees to all the terms and sends it back. We do not have a contract, an agreed upon contract, until the seller signs number 8. So even though the seller and buyer sign this, the seller needs to sign a GRIN, and this is where they're saying they are agreeing to John's contract and none of the other ones. And it says here, do not sign in this box until after buyer signs in paragraph 7. Do not sign in this box if the buyer is sending. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
It's a little confusing, but I'm sure I'll figure it out.
Okay.
How you have to understand it is that on the seller counteroffer, it volleys once back and forth, right? Because the seller presents that counter, then the buyer has the option to sign it, or again, subject to the buyer's counteroffer. On this one, the seller makes the counteroffer, then the buyer has the right to sign this one or counter again. And then if eventually the seller then needs to officially accept this counteroffer if this is how the buyer responds. Does that make sense? So this basically volleys 3 times versus the other form volleys twice.
But this is a multiple offer one.
Yeah, this is multiple, because you might get multiple buyers who sign off on just this counteroffer, and that still gives the seller the option to still choose who they want to go with.
Right, because now when you're doing a multiple seller, is it multiple buyer or multiple seller? I'm so confused. If you're doing a okay, so if you're doing a multiple buyer form, your response to the buyers doesn't have to be the same, though, right?
Right.
It could be 3 different prices, right? You don't have to agree to one price, right? Based on all of the offers you had in, you could have 3 different counters, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's
Yeah.
correct.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
That's
Okay.
correct.
Okay.
All right. And then after the seller agrees to this, the buyer would initial. Unless, of course, the buyer said subject to the attached counteroffer, and then you'd get a buyer counteroffer 1. And the seller would never sign this box.
So now that bottom, the confirmation comes into play, right?
No. So if you have your seller multiple counteroffer, buyer checks subject to the attached counteroffer, so you have seller and buyer signature, and then you get the buyer counteroffer, neither 8 nor this is signed on the seller multiple counteroffer. You would then go to buyer counteroffer 1. Buyer made their terms, seller accepts, or then seller counters again. If the seller accepts, then buyer does the confirmation of acceptance.
Wait, the buyer does the confirmation or the seller does the confirmation?
Buyer.
Whoever writes the form does the confirmation that they know the other party has signed, if all terms are agreed.
Oh boy, okay.
So it's only on the multiple you need the confirmation, or you need them on both?
You're supposed to have a confirmation if all the terms in the RPA are agreed to. The buyer would initial confirmation. If all the terms on the seller counteroffer are agreed to, after the buyer signs, the seller initials confirmation.
But why do we need that? I don't understand why. If
Okay.
you know, a lawyer says it doesn't matter. Gov Hutchinson says it doesn't matter.
I'll tell you. Okay, so this is the reason that they give us in the forms trainer. If you were in a situation where you were the seller you countered, the buyer signed it, but you as the seller went on a vacation on Friday, you went on a cruise, and you're on a 5-day cruise, the buyer has agreed, we're looking at the wrong form, but the buyer has agreed, but you don't know that it's an escrow until you come back from your cruise. In that case, that's why you need the confirmation of acceptance. Because if something like that were to happen where one of the parties was not available and did not see that they were already in escrow, then that confirmation of acceptance comes into play. But that's really the only time, and it hardly ever happens, but I have had it happen probably like 2 times in the last 4 years, where one of the parties is out of town when the number 4 was agreed upon. And so they didn't know it was in escrow until 3 or 4 days later.
Well, okay. All right, I guess. I mean, I'll take your word for it, but file review does require that, right? Confirmation.
Yes, but it doesn't have to be the buyer or seller. It can just be you.
Yeah, right. Oh, of course, yeah.
Yeah, so if file review is banging on you for that, just initial it yourself.
You as the agent represent your client, and you can initial that.
Right.
And something
Right.
else that I was always told also is that it's, a placeholder for timing of like when things are supposed to also, necessarily get started and whatnot, to confirm that all parties have had a copy of the agreement. But again, I think I have to side with what Niki's saying. It's not always used, but there are circumstances where it's important. So that's why it's there.
And that's the case. In that time, Paul,
Yeah.
where it did happen, the buyer didn't know they were in escrow for 5 days.
Mhm.
And so when they did the confirmation of acceptance, that was when the timeline started in that specific transaction, because the buyer was not aware. They couldn't get a hold of them. They weren't able to get, if the timeline had started here, buyer was already 5 days into an escrow and they didn't have their EMD in.
Right.
So in that case, that is when you really need a confirmation of acceptance. But most of the time, it's based on who signs. Right.
Here's why I always ask Gov about this, and because I had an attorney one time, a well-known attorney, a real estate attorney, okay, and he was selling his own property, and in the time the other agent didn't do this confirmation, he got a better offer, $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 more, and he went with that offer after line 4 was signed. And he basically just told the other agent, hey, screw you, you did not confirm it, and we're going with the other offer. And that's the way it stood, and that's the way it went down. That was you.
And that is absolutely one of the reasons why you do want to do confirmation of acceptance.
Right.
I do think that's kind of walking the line of ethical.
Yeah, I think that's a very tightrope for ethics. That's an interesting story to hear, because you would clearly see intention amongst the parties of that they were accepting that offer. That's interesting to hear.
Yeah, I was there. I mean, I worked in the same office as the gentleman, so I was right there when it went down. I couldn't believe it either, Nick.
Crazy. All right, you want to move on to the next part, Niki?
Sure. What is the next part?
I don't know. We could go into requests for repairs. Does anybody have any questions on like seller counteroffers in general, or buyer counteroffers in general? Because we can go over like some terminology that you're going to see. You're going to see best and final. You're going to see as is. Property sold without any concessions and whatnot. And keep in mind, guys, when you see things like as is, or you see, property be sold without any concessions, the buyer's not waiving their right to investigate that property. Okay, all that is stating is that the seller does not want to give any credits of any kind because they don't want to dig into their, overall net on the property, right? That's what that is talking about. But the buyer is still, are allowed per se per their item 14B in the contract to investigate that property. So why that's important for you guys to know is I don't want you to, if you're newer on this call today, I want you to not feel like your buyer doesn't have the option to get in there and do their investigations, because we absolutely want to make sure our buyer has an opportunity to investigate that property. But when it comes down time to ask for repairs or credits or things like that, the seller has already forewarned you saying, listen, we're not giving any credits of any kind. The reason why sometimes that as is not so concrete is because let's say that buyer now wants to cancel. Seller might be like, well, geez, I just wasted 14 days, 17 days on allowing this buyer to be in escrow with me. I know I said as is, but what are they concerned about? And so it tends to open up a new conversation of, well, geez, if they want to cancel, I'd rather work with them than not. And so I just want you guys to know that you're going to see that out there. It is something you should take into account that the seller doesn't want to give credits. And for those listing agents that are on the call today, I know we're writing that in because we're trying to protect our clients, but if the buyer wants to back away, sometimes that changes the conversation, just so you know.
But the buyer has the right to walk away even if in the counter, I mean, what if you've removed some contingencies, do you still have the right to walk away?
I don't want to get too much into contingencies today, just because that's kind of a loaded theme, but if they removed, first off, I really hope you guys are not in deals where you're removing your inspection contingency unless you're dealing with somebody super savvy.
Right.
But if you are removing contingencies, yes, you've lost the ability to cancel per whatever contingency you have removed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nick, I had it explained to me a little differently when I became a broker, and it kind of makes more sense. In California, you really, you can sell a property as is if you've done all your disclosures. If every single disclosure is filled out and the inspection's done, then you can put as is. But if none of that stuff's done, you shouldn't put as is in any counter or any purchase contract, because it's already in the purchase contract basically.
Yeah, I was just going to say, isn't it already written in there somewhere? I feel
Yes.
like.
Okay,
Okay.
let me interject here. The contract says the property is sold in its as is condition.
Right.
Right.
So on a seller counteroffer, you don't need to reiterate that. You reiterate that. Most of the time when people reiterate it, it's because their seller wants it said.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
just because somebody writes as is does not mean that a buyer can't ask for repairs. Because I've absolutely had times where everybody said as is, everybody agreed, and then it was a crazy safety hazard.
As disclosed is as is.
Paul, on that note, do you ever see people showing all the disclosures prior to an offer accepted?
That's the way it's supposed to be done, Jennifer, and that's the way that's a whole different school of real estate.
Well,
Yeah.
it's not supposed to be done that way, Paul, because you have 7 days to get it to them.
Okay, that's my opinion, but nobody does it that way.
It's a good.
In San Francisco, up north, they do it. That's absolutely the way they do it.
Go.
But down south, we don't do it that way.
Yeah, I was really confused because they clients accepted an offer and then they hadn't even done their disclosures yet, and I was like, what the hell? And I reached out to Nick and I go, why haven't they done their disclosures? And he said, well, you have 7 days to hand that over. But I thought, wow, because you could lose a deal right there if something comes up in those disclosures that the buyers are unaware of. So I thought that was interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And Melissa Bragman just chimed in with a comment as well. She said most buyers' offers still ask for a termite report, right? And the truth is, yes, in our local market, depends on where you do real estate, I have to say. In our local market, yes, a lot of buyers are still asking for termite in their offers, Section 1 clearance. We don't ask for Section 2. We typically ask for Section 1, unless it's a VA offer.
Let me jump in here really quick. Ask for the report. Do not ask for the clearance in the counters or in the purchase contract. You can ask for the report because seller is responsible to give you certain reports, and you can ask for that. But the request for repairs is where you want to negotiate if Section 1 is being repaired.
Okay.
I completely agree with that. Thank you for saying that, Nikki. That's actually how they do it in LA anyways. But when I came to Long Beach and Los Alamitos, everybody was like, no, we write it in. And I was like, that is insane. Why would you want to deal with that? Why would you agree to a cost that we don't even know what it is? So that's interesting. Thank you for
So
saying
you're agreeing, the seller's agreeing to the termite inspection, but not necessarily doing the work? Is that what
Yes.
you're saying? Okay. So
They're agreeing to provide you the report of what kind of wood destroying pest damage there is on the property.
and then you could okay, and then down the road you could give credit for whatever work that
Yes.
entails. Or you can just say, okay, I got it. Thanks.
Well, this is what I did on my last 2 listings. I did all the disclosures, the termite report, the NHD, and all that stuff, and put it in a folder and stuck it in a cabinet in the property. And if anybody called me and said, hey, Paul, I really like this house. Can you give me some more information? Yeah, it's up in the cabinet. There's all the disclosures. Read them. And the guy that bought one of the houses, he was a flipper, and he really liked that. You know, oh yeah, okay, you had all the disclosures ready. Thank you. So I don't know, just 2 different schools.
that's very classy of you, Paul. I love that. That's awesome. That's how I
I
was.
think that is amazing. And speaking as a TC, I always like to have the disclosures done 1 week after the listing, but sometimes it just doesn't happen.
Yeah. I highly suggest for all the newer agents on the call that if you're not doing disclosures with your client when you take the listing, or at least leaving those disclosures with them as homework or something when you take the listing, that I feel like you're doing a disservice for your entire process, because sometimes things will even come up in those disclosures that you as an agent can already address ahead of time anyways, to just make the process flow better. So anywho, off the soapbox.
Well said, Nick.
All right.
The other thing, okay, I just want to reiterate too, as the agent, you need to follow up. Just because you drop off the disclosures doesn't mean that they're going to get done. So,
Amen.
like, put something on the calendar to say, oh, do I have those disclosures yet? And follow up with your client. Do you have any questions? Because yes, I always want to give the disclosures the very first day that we open escrow.
Yep.
Wow, that's so interesting. So interesting.
That's like super old school, but it's honestly the best way.
But also things come up where it could be some work that needs to be done on the house. It's easily fixed prior to even being listed. That could come up in the disclosure part, right? When you're sitting down and going through the house. So
Yep.
Makes sense to me. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Or there could be some things that you need to address. I had a deal where we absolutely knew when the seller filled out the disclosures that the fence was on the neighbor's property line. So it was something we were able to address at the very beginning, not something that ended up blowing up, 17 days down the line.
All right, darling, we've got to move on just because we've only got 18 minutes and
Can I ask another question? This is Christine. On the request for repair, originally when I started, we were all doing it on the purchase agreement and then requesting the seller to pay for it. But since we're not putting it on the purchase agreement because we don't want the lender to see it, how do we get to do that and request, a report after everything has been accepted from the seller and have them to pay for it?
I always have them put it in the purchase contract.
You still do?
Yeah, just the report. And then if the lender has a problem, this happens probably every other week for me, we just do an addendum saying the termite is no longer a part of the contract, and everybody knows that is just for the lender purposes.
Okay, so you just talked about reporting, don't talk about.
Right, yeah, do not talk about clearance, because that goes on the request for repair, and nobody's obligated to give the lender the request for repair.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Okay, so this is the request for repair. Number one, this is the date that you're filling it out. This is the date that the purchase contract is written. Buyer and seller's names here. Buyer requests that seller prior to the final verification of condition repair or take other specified action for each of the items listed below. If you had too many for this lines, you could check this and do a Word document, or just like I showed you before, it'll just keep giving you more and more and more and more lines for a text overflow addendum.
And when is this given in the process?
You technically want to have this done before the buyer investigation is completed.
So
Actually,
you're representing the buyer here, clearly.
yes.
And this is given to the seller prior to the final walkthrough, is what you're saying.
No,
Before that.
prior to buyer investigation contingency removal, which could be
21.
17 days, or it could be shortened to 10 days.
Okay.
So you would actually want to do it like on day 8
Yeah.
or day 15.
What if you get this to the seller on day, what if your buyer's dragging their butt and you get this to the seller on day like 15?
Then you do, and you can ask for an extension.
Okay.
Most sellers and listing agents will negotiate this before they send you the contingency removal. They'll just check the box here and say that you have to give them the contingency removal.
And Nikki, when you give this to the seller and they do the things like, say it's just the stuff in the red, the safety stuff, and they do those things, isn't it, last time I did, I took this with me for my buyer's final walkthrough just to check off and make sure that each one of those things have been done and completed.
That is very smart, and I highly recommend that.
Okay.
Everyone do that.
So as long as it's done, like you want it done right before that final walkthrough, because you want to make sure everything that your buyers asked for is done.
Right, that's actually the point. One of the points of a final walkthrough is to verify that all the repairs have been completed and that the property is in the same condition as when you made the offer.
Okay.
That's actually the only reason why the final walkthrough was even created.
Yeah, technically, yes.
It's for verification of repairs. So yeah, that would be awesome. Can I just say one thing real quick? I notice a lot of times people are writing things in their repair requests that require further investigation. Like they will say certain things like, oh gosh, they'll say evidence of, side yard flooding, blah, 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 seller to further correct the issue or something like that. They put in a lot of verbiage that requires further investigation. So what I'm trying to say here is don't give the seller homework that your buyer should be doing. Like if you notice that there's something weird about the electrical and you're basically like, hey seller, I don't know what it is, but just make sure it's right. And a lot of times you'll see language in your inspection report that says requires further investigation by a licensed blah, 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 blah. You'll see that a lot in your inspection reports. There's a good reason behind that because your general inspector is just supposed to come through and point out like, hey, this doesn't look right, this doesn't look right, this doesn't look right, this doesn't look right. They're not going to tell you they're not usually at least going to tell you costs. They're not usually going to tell you, what's the process for actually getting that corrected. Sometimes they will. If they're a good, well-experienced inspector, they will. But you really should be relying on those specialists. So I notice sometimes we're kind of like in and out really quick, and then we send over our request for repairs, and sometimes we've still got 5, 6, 7 days left on our inspection contingency. Make sure you're doing that investigation for your client. Like if the guy says have an electrician come out, have an electrician come out. What's the benefit of that? You're going to actually have a specialist who can tell you what's actually wrong. They can tell you exactly the cost. And what's nice about that is they're going to give you invoices. So when we're coming down to this, I can't tell you how many times in a month I get a call from an agent that says, hey, Nick, I'm drawing up a request for repairs. How much do you think this is worth to have fixed? I don't know. And I'm like 9 times out of 10 not going to give you a number because the only person who could give you a cost for something would be a specialist for whatever it is that we're talking about. So my thing is you can ask for stuff to be corrected all day long, guys, like leaky plumbing and, so on and so forth. That's fine. But if it requires further investigation, make sure you're not letting the seller do homework for the buyer. First off, that's scary. because you're having the seller go ahead and do work or investigate something that the buyer should be the one investigating. It's almost like having, if you're the, the defendant, you're having the other side of your argument go ahead and do homework for you. So, and that's just weird. So my thing would be, make sure you're doing your investigations thoroughly. If you need more time to get specialists out there, ask for more time. And if you are asking for a credit, justify that credit. Don't just throw out a number like, oh, that sounds like it'd be $5,000. Don't throw out a number like $5,000. If it really is worth $4,200, $4,250, then you ask for $4,250 if that's what it actually costs. So something my mentor used to teach me was make sure you're having invoices for what money you're asking for. Make sure you're doing all of your investigation thoroughly. And don't leave it up to the seller to just guess or figure stuff out. You don't want that other side figuring stuff out for you.
I highly agree with that. Every time I have a client that sends invoices, it goes much better, the negotiation part. So this is something that one of the agents I work with has been doing lately. So this box right here in the top is for you to list all the things that you want the seller to repair. B is for Section 1 termite clearance and Section 2 clearance. C is for a credit, and D is to reduce the purchase price. The buyer can check all of these, or they can check one of them, or just two of them. But a lot of times when you request a credit, it's good to have this verbiage up here and then say why, which repairs you're asking the credit for. Because if you just put $5,000 here, and then the seller's going to want to know why. What is it? Why are you asking for $5,000? If you say here that the water heater is 30 years old and the roof is falling off the patio and that's why you want the $10,000 credit, then it's a good way to have that verbal story being told to the seller so they understand what's going on. So if you can remember, this is a pretty good way to write that out. Check in here anything that you're including. Invoice from Tom Bittner, property inspection, sewer inspection, chimney inspection. Check all of the things that you're attaching to let the seller know why you're asking for these repairs. Okay.
Can I ask something about termite? Termite confuses me. It's like if you have a seller who knows there's some termite issues but doesn't necessarily want to pay for it, is this where like the buyer has brought in their own termite as well? And is this where they would be asking if that's not included in the original agreement, would they be asking for the termite here?
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, they could.
Okay.
Yeah, if the seller counters out the termite report and your buyer goes ahead and gets one, they can ask for the clearance here.
Okay. But it has to be done. Does the termite have to be done for a sale to be complete or not? Or just, I mean, do you have to?
Yes, it's supposed to be done before close of escrow. Lenders may require it and then it'll have to be done. I've had a few cases where the work ended up being done after, but it takes a lot of finagling with escrow and addendums and stuff.
Okay, thanks.
Nikki, if you're representing the buyer and you wanted to have like the sewer inspected and the chimney inspected and all that, would you put it anywhere else in anything up till this far, or is this into where you would put that? Like buyer, but the buyer pays for it.
The buyer pays for it. The buyer can do any inspection they want to do. But keep in mind, if you put something in a purchase contract or a counteroffer about a buyer paying it for an inspection, the lender can ask for it.
If the buyer pays for it?
Yep, if it's written down and the lender sees it,
Oh, the lender wants to see it to see what
Yes.
the report says. I see what you mean.
yes. So
Okay.
you never need to say what inspections you're doing. You just do any old inspection you please, as long as you're not damaging the home of the seller.
Okay, so the only time you would use this too is if it's something that you want the sellers to pay for.
Yeah, or you want to justify your credit or your reduction of the purchase price.
So if you want to do an inspection on anything, you don't need to ask anyone.
Well, you need to let them know that you're coming,
Well,
but
of course, but you don't need to like put it in anywhere, I guess, is what I mean.
yeah, no, you don't need to put it in. And
Thanks.
Okay, so the seller receives the request for repair. They can agree to the buyer's requests. When they agree, the buyer removes the physical inspection contingency. That's just written in there. Number 2 is buyer removes those contingencies identified on the attached contingency removal form. When you get to this point, everybody should be sending a contingency removal form themselves. Because,
Well, the seller should.
yeah, the seller you should always add it. Because if you look at the contingency removal form, sorry, my phone was ringing. There's buyer's investigation, there's prelim, there's reports and disclosures. There's all sorts of contingencies that they can remove, usually by this time in the contract. The seller can say they're not going to do any of the request for repairs. The seller can respond on the attached RRRR, seller's response to request for repair. But the seller also has the right to completely ignore a request for repair. Any questions?
Do they have to sign somewhere to just be like, nah, we're not going to do any of this? Or do they just not acknowledge that they even got that thing?
They don't have to acknowledge it.
Right.
I mean, it's nice.
Somewhere that they would sign and say, no, I don't, or yes, I do.
Right here, seller does not agree.
Oh, you check the box. Duh.
Mhm.
That's a true as-is situation.
Yes. Yes. Okay. If the seller agrees to all of the buyer's requests, buyer hereby removes this physical inspection contingency on the attached CR form or this. Oh my gosh. Then there is the seller's response to request for repair.
I don't think there's enough forms personally. I think there need to be more forms. That's my thing.
More forms, really?
Okay, so once again, you want to hit 1 and 1. I haven't seen it too much lately where we get to the 2s, but it has been happening. This is the date the request for repair was created. Seller can agree to all of buyer's requests except certain things. They can agree to a different amount credit than the buyer already asked for. They can agree to reduce the purchase price or other.
Can I ask a question that might be obvious, but is there a way for, I mean, obviously there's properties sold as is but I mean, is it legal to sell a home and not allow this request for repair to be submitted? Like,
No.
okay, so this is a legal thing that any buyer,
You can say as is all you want
right?
from here to
Right.
infinity, but the buyer can always ask for something.
Gotcha. Okay. And the seller can say F you, but the buyer has the right
Yes.
for it.
Yes. Pretty sure. Just want to make sure. This gives you a text overflow as well.
Hey, Nikki, I hate to do this, but I think, well, I'm going to leave. I'm going to be gone. So I'm going to jump to my 2 o'clock, guys. Love all of you, and thank you for being awesome, Nikki. Just keep carrying it on out. I might have to send out a secondary link because you're still using this account. So, okay, bye.
Bye. You can, when you send out a seller's response, you can attach a contingency removal again. The buyer either A, accepts the response and just signs, B, accepts the seller's response with the following modification. Say the seller said they were going to credit you $2,000, but you want $3,000. This would be where you did it. Or they didn't agree to put the screens in the windows and you want it in. Or the buyer can withdraw everything in request for repair 1 and create a new request for repair number 2. If the buyer makes a modification, the seller can agree to the modification or they can not agree. And then you go back to a whole new request for repair.
And in all these spots, you list 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is going to create that added addendum like we saw earlier.
I believe so. 1, 2. The only place it doesn't is right here.
Huh.
If that ever comes up and you need more than this amount,
Yeah.
call me and I figured out a workaround.
Okay. Great.
Any questions?
No.
Yeah, but if the seller doesn't want to do any repair and doesn't give a credit or anything, the buyer cannot cancel the agreement.
If they, yeah, they can.
Yeah.
They can? Can they
Mhm.
cancel if they are within the 21 days or whatever the contingencies?
As long as they have not removed their investigation contingency,
Oh, I see.
they
Okay.
can cancel. Yeah. Yeah,
Okay, cool. Good job, Nikki. Thank you. I'm
you're welcome.
not quite as confused as normal, which is shocking for me. Absolutely shocking. Oh, God.
It comes.
Absolutely shocking.
Any other questions, you guys?
No, so I'm good.
You're good? Okay,
You're good?
Okay,
Mhm.
I just want to end this. Never, 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 never send escrow or lenders the request for repairs. Oh, there's a couple things I want to end this with.
Will
Sorry.
they ask? Will they sometimes ask for it?
No, they will not ask for it,
Mhm.
but for whatever reason, I've had certain people send it.
Oh dear.
But you don't want to do that.
Mm-mm.
So the next thing I want to follow this with is whether you represent the buyer or the seller, if there is a purchase price reduction or account or a credit to the buyer,
Mhm.
first thing, if you represent the buyer, make sure you know the allowable credit amount before you ask for credits, okay?
From the lender? The lender
Yes.
will have oh, gotcha.
Yes, do that homework, because if you ask for too much, you're not gonna get it,
Okay.
okay?
Uh-huh.
So that's what you wanna do before you send those.
Okay.
If you've all agreed, whether you're a seller or buyer's agent, call escrow immediately and just tell them
Yeah.
or email them. Just wanted to let you know we're going to do a purchase price reduction, or we're going to do the addendum, changing things. I will forward that as soon as I have it.
Okay. So there's a purchase price addendum. There's a purchase price change addendum form.
Right. So if you guys, everyone agrees to a purchase price reduction or a credit, that is the only two things that go on an addendum.
Okay.
So say the seller said, okay, we're going to give you $3,000 credit.
Mm-hmm.
You all agreed it. You called escrow. You told them it's coming. Then buyer and seller need to sign something. And it says seller to credit.
Got
Buyer for recurring and non-recurring closing costs. And this is the only thing you give to escrow and the buyer and the lender.
Okay.
Okay? Or purchase price to be blah, 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 blah.
Okay. And you're sending that. I mean, the TC is sending that, right?
The TC is sending this.
Okay. Okay.
But I can tell you where we've done all the negotiations on the repairs, but for whatever reason, it's taking forever to get this addendum done.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to get, say you do this at day 17
Mm-hmm.
and day 20, nobody's signed it yet. You don't want to come back to the escrow or your lender on day 20 and be like, oh, by the way.
Right. Because that loan there might be an issue now with that loan.
Yes, because if it's gone to underwriting,
right,
or that closing disclosure has gone out to your buyer, they're going to have to go redo it.
Right.
So as soon as you guys know that there's a credit or there's a price reduction, call or email escrow and the lender and just let them know that it's coming.
Okay.
Nobody's surprised that way.
Gotcha.
So
Perfect.
maybe we don't need to be a little more detailed and say credit $3,000 to buyer for fixing the fence.
Nope.
You don't have to be
Don't wanna know that.
detailed.
Nobody needs to know that.
Got it.
This is all that the lender and escrow wants to know.
Oh, because this is what the lender and escrow can see. Yeah, you don't want to get,
Uh-huh.
got it. You don't want to be detailed with them. Got it, got it, got it.
Right, the details for that credit go on the request for repair, which escrow and lender never see. This is just for escrow and lender purposes only.
Okay.
Okay,
Yeah. Thank you.
you're welcome. Any other questions?
I have a
Oh.
question. It's it's not exactly on this request for repair, but I had a template done for purchases like a year ago when you had a class, and I was wondering, is there, except for the COVID forms, is there any changes or any addition that I need to look at to make sure that the forms that are on my templates are updated?
There is nothing other than the COVID forms that has changed.
Okay. Thank you.
Right. Yeah. Okay, there's one more chat. Great class, thank you. You're welcome. I am going to do a template class coming up soon, and I am going to show you guys how to add dates to things so that it will show up. So you can add dates to the contingency removal forms so that they will show up on your calendar.
All right.
And they'll show up on your dashboard at the top. There'll be a calendar available.
Thank you.
Something to look forward to. And I think that's it, unless anyone
Thank you
has
so
any other
much.
questions.
No, great class.
No.
Thank you. I can't wait to have a copy of this so I can watch it again.
All right.
Thanks for all your work. Good work saving kittens. Appreciate that as well.
Oh, I know, they were quiet. Yay.
Thanks, Nikki. Good class.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you very much, Nikki.
You're welcome. Have a good day.
Thanks.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, Christine.
Bye.